All right. All right. Hello, everybody. How we doing? Super excited to go over this essay with you guys. We'll give everybody about, get a couple minutes to jump in. We'll start with a little conversation. Let's start with Aaron B. How's it going, Aaron? Oh, still got no Aaron, but I see we got Max. What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
What's going on, DeAndre?
Not too bad, not too bad. Did you get a haircut?
I did get a haircut.
Yeah. All right. New look, feeling it.
New look. I'm always a new looks, new identities, dealing with all this. But here we are, present.
Yep. All right. So today we're covering the property essay, right? This is question 3. How did you do on question 3?
Yeah, I got a 55 on question 3, which kind of surprised me, honestly, because I felt like at least during the moment, I felt like I smashed this property essay. And that's not to say that 55 is saying that I didn't really do amazing, but I think if I looked at it closer and maybe compared to a sample answer, I could see like what the distinguishing factor between like what I made and what the bar expected. I might have missed a few issues, and I'm not entirely sure. I kind of just briefly kind of went through all my essays today at a faster pace as opposed to like comparing it to an example.
Yeah. So yeah, we're definitely going to go through it today, guys. And so the objective of going through this essay together is to obviously jump in here and just get a little bit of explanation as to why we got some of our grades and what some things are that I would have done and approach this essay with. And it can kind of, while we wait for the student answers, give us some type of sense of what was needed. Now, if we go through this today, and the big focus is going to be on the issue spotting and the making sense of everything. If there are big issues that we talk about that, I feel strongly that is required for you to discuss and you didn't discuss them, that means there was an issue with your issue spotting, right? Maybe there's an issue with your organization. Well, if you caught all the issues that I'm going to end up discussing, it sounds like more so the issue is with a thorough analysis. So not only, can we learn today just about what this content is, this area of law that's being tested, but we can also start doing some of that diagnosis that we talked about yesterday and figuring out what is it exactly, that's causing me to lose the points. So that is the objective of the day. Let's see who else we got. I see one camera to get some more cameras on. Ellie, you there? You with us? No, Ellie either. What about you, Chris? I will come back to Chris. I see Ramona is joining us. How you doing, Ramona? Thank you for indulging. How did you do on this question number 3?
That's actually why I had my camera off, because I'm trying to log in and it's asking for a new password. So I'm like dealing with all of that right now.
Oh, for like the bar results?
Yeah, it says I have to update my password. So
Got it.
I'll get back to you. I don't have these things memorized. I've tried to black it out the last few days, but I'm back on track right now.
Okay. Do you have any feelings that you remember towards this property essay? Was it something that you felt confident with versus something that you were a little stumped on?
For me, in general, real property has been a struggle for me. So I never feel super confident going into a real property essay. And not surprisingly, my MBE, that was one of my lowest scores. So having said that, I didn't think I did horrible. I definitely walked away thinking I understood at least the main concept. So I'm interested to see where I went wrong.
Okay, so it's 7:05. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So this is going to be the property essay. We're going to go ahead and jump into the essay. We're not going to do the full, read it on your own, take all the notes. We're going to jump into essentially my kind of bullet point notes, right? You guys should have done this essay, most people here. And if not, I'm going to give you kind of again, the main points to refresh us of the facts, and then we'll jump into, what we think is triggered. So let me go ahead and share screen. All right. So these bullet points also represent something that is an option for you to do during the day of the exam. So When it comes to my system for preparing for an exam, it's been altered a little bit ever since COVID, right? And a lot of times during COVID, you weren't allowed to have scratch paper to take your notes. And I'm a big proponent of taking notes and preparing for my essays. So we kind of started to create this system of taking notes on the computer. So obviously the risk with that is like, if your computer dies, you know, you don't have then, you know, the notes that you just took. And my thought process is that if your computer dies, you got a lot more to worry about than losing your notes from the beginning of this. So, you know, it's like I would just deal with that problem if I had it. And if ultimately you do better with typing your notes and it's faster for you and it's more efficient, something to explore. So just before this session, about 30 minutes, I went ahead and did this prep for this essay. And these are all the notes that I took from this essay. So first off, you have Twan, who sells antique furniture. And just to, you know, I don't know what background of a name that is. Yeah, Max, would you pronounce that the same way, Twan?
Yeah, probably. Tuan.
Right? Tuan or Twan? Yeah, I will go with Twan. All right. Twan sells antique furniture. Leo leased his warehouse to Twan for 10 years for $1,000 a month starting January 1st. Okay, take a second to get all that in, right? So this is a commercial lease situation. He's going to landlord Leo, right? Landlord Leo. It's 10-year lease for $1,000 a month. All right, and it's starting at the beginning of the year. That makes things easy to count up months and things like that. The issue is, the first issue that we get, and I label it as an issue. So this is a fun fact. Whenever I'm going through an essay, if I can identify certain issues and I remember to do so, I'll label that. So that's what you see me do here, right? Where it says issue. Twan could not occupy the warehouse on 1/1 because Annika was there. So he got this lease and he's ready to move in, and somebody is there on day one. That's not a good feeling. So obviously that's a big issue. It says Annika had a valid lease that ended on 1/31, right? In parentheses is when I'm kind of doing my reading comprehension and making some sense here. So that's where I'm going to put, there's a month overlap here, right? So Max, if there's a month overlap, who are we kind of pointing the finger at for this issue that we have?
I mean, based on common sense principle, probably the landlord, because it's on him to, you know, say like, oh, actually, I can't get you in on 1/1 because my prior lease ends 1/31.
There we go. So it looks like Leo here double booked, right? Double dipped in the cookie jar, trying to make money for January from two people. Okay. So it says Twan self-remedied the situation. These are my notes. He self-remedied the situation by renting another warehouse from Bruno on a month-to-month basis for $1,500. So basically he was like, well, he didn't sign another long-term lease. He was just like, let me just do something short-term to wait for Annika to leave. Very resourceful of Twan to do so. He did so for $1,500 a month, right? This is something that I'm doing as I'm reading. You immediately want to do some of these calculations, guys, because this is the type of analysis with this type of essay that they want to see you do. And it's easiest to do it right away. He was originally going to lease the warehouse for $1,000 a month from Leo, but now he's doing $1,500 a month. That's $500 more a month. And I'm putting down note, he may want damages for that, right? And that's ultimately what we're going to talk about. So there you go. He's paying $500 more for that, at least that first month. We move on. On 2/1, Annika shockingly informs Twan, and I'm putting that word shockingly, like this was a little unexpected, that she's not moving out until 5/31. So originally she said, hey, I have a valid lease here until the end of January. And then out of nowhere, she's just like, hey, I'm not leaving until the end of May. So then again, do some calculations. That's 4 months later. All right. So just a few notes on that. Ramona, what kind of doctrines of law, you know, might come up with her staying over her lease for an additional 4 months?
I'm pretty sure this is when I started mentioning tenancy and periodic tenancies.
And what term of art specifically for periodic tenancy do we want to like trigger here?
Can I phone a friend?
Phone a friend. What do we think? Somebody?
Just a holdover tenant?
Yeah, a holdover tenant, right? A tenant who seemingly without permission is deciding to remain on the property, right? And it only turns into a periodic tenancy more or less if the landlord continues to accept those rent checks. Well, I guess you could be actually you're a wrongful holdover if you're doing so without the permission. So yeah, what we have here is a holdover tenant. So it's good just to kind of like, note that down. All right, moving on 6-1. Juan visited the warehouse and noticed that 25% of the warehouse was unusable because Leo was storing equipment there. All right, another quick fun fact, right? For those new to Legally Fit, you want to really connect with the fact pattern. That's the best way you're going to have the reading comprehension. And what I'm processing here is that, Tuan is going through it. He signed this lease, excited to store his inventory for his furniture store here. When it's time to move in, Annika's there. Annika says, I'll be out in 30 days. He comes, and then Annika says, I'm going to stay for another 4 months. And then after those 4 months, Juan's coming back, just nice old Juan or Tuan coming back. And then now he's noticing that 25% of the warehouse was unusable because Leo was storing equipment there, right? So now it's like, I don't even get the full warehouse that I contracted for. What about this? Like, what kind of areas of law are coming to mind when a landlord is not providing the entire, premise, the entire property to the tenant?
Yeah, I would just say I wrote about constructive eviction.
So constructive eviction. And I also think there's going to be a little bit of triggering of partial eviction as well. I don't think ultimately that's going to be the full-on discussion, because the remedy for partial eviction is not ultimately the remedy that Tuan's going to want here, but I think it's worth the discussion. So we'll come back to that in more detail. It says that Tuan refuses to take possession and inform Leo that he was terminating his lease immediately. So here you have the tenant who is saying, I'm out. Of course, in a landlord-tenant situation, the tenant's duty is to pay rent. Well, he's not paying rent, so you're going to need a justification for that. Ramona, do you know what the typical justification for not paying rent is going to be from a big picture perspective?
This is when I started mentioning like the implied warranty of habitability, and yeah, basically. Honestly, I got confused in this. I remember I started talking about breach of contract right here.
Okay.
Getting into contract.
So, and understandably so, because it's essentially a rent contract or a rent agreement, but this is going to be a majority a property essay where you don't necessarily need to get into the contract. But all that to say, you were going down the right path. Implied warranty of habitability is a type of landlord duty. So proving L breached a landlord duty is going to be the way to justify not paying rent. All right. After that, it says Leo retakes possession of the warehouse. So the landlord's like, all right, fine, give me my warehouse back with my 25% of it occupied. And then they place for rent signs on several windows. Shortly after, Leo leased warehouse to Juanita for 10 years with a start date of July 1st. So this is 6 months later. All right, we're in July now. Okay. And this is for $500 a month. And so again, do the math really quickly. Leo originally contracted with Tuan to lease that warehouse for how much, Ramona?
One second, $500 less than Tuan. I don't remember the number.
It was for $1,000, right? And this is the type of stuff that, like, even right now, we're not getting it. We're trying to like slim, the fat off the fact pattern. And this is the difficulty, in reading that I want to challenge us all to do, is that we want to like stick with those numbers as we're reading to get those. And so, yeah, it was $1,000 a month that he was going to get from Tuan, and now he's going to get $500 a month. So it's $500 less, right? So we're keeping that all in mind. As you see there, I'm taking that note. All right, so that's ultimately, if Leo sues for damages, his damages are going to be, in that range. So it says Tuan rented on a month-to-month basis with Bruno for 6 months from January to June for $1,500 a month equals 9,000. I'm just doing a little math there. And then he signed a long-term lease for 9.5 years, starting on July 1st with a monthly rent of $1,500. So ultimately, he ended up doing a 10-year lease for $1,500. So this is actually another $500 difference the other way, right? So both of these had an agreement for $1,000. The landlord ended up leasing it for $500 less, and then the tenant had to go somewhere else and ended up signing a contract for $500 more. All right, so we're dealing with the same, number here, which is good for our math purposes. And so, yeah, just want to take note, as we say here, since it's 9.5 years, it's set to end at the same time as the original date with Leo. All right, so it's good to know when we're doing the damages calculations. It's not like, oh, one contract was for 10 years and the next one was for 12, right? The time frame is matching up. So ultimately, it is Tuan paying $500 more a month for 120 months, right? Can somebody tell me, other than Max, can somebody tell me how we got to 120 months? All right, y'all know it's 7 o'clock, it's after work. We gotta wake up. So he got to 120 months because it is 10 months. I'm sorry, excuse me, 10 years. There's 12 months in a year. So that was the total term lease here, was right, 120 months. It says Juan never paid any rent to Leo. Okay, so I'm also going to walk you through the steps of what a legally fit student should be doing to help yourself issue spot. This is the entire fact pattern. Before we get into issue spotting, are there any questions on the facts? Does anybody feel like they need to see the original essay? I can also put the original essay in the chat as well. Let me go ahead and do that. But yeah, do we have any questions on the fact pattern? Okay. Fact pattern is in the chat, and you can go ahead and it's question 3 if you need to reference that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing screen on that. Let's go to, actually, let me bring up the essay so we can see the call of the question. So the call of the question is, what claims, if any, may Tuan reasonably assert against Leo? What claims, if any, may Tuan reasonably assert against Annika? And what counterclaim, if any, may Leo reasonably assert against Tuan? And of course, right, like there's a certain way you should be leaning here. Max, who are we seemingly most favorable to as we get into assessing what claims they have? Like, who seems to be likely the winning party in all of this?
Yeah, I'd prioritize Tuan because it seems like he kind of got the short end of the deal.
Exactly, right. And now, even though Leo seemingly here is like, doing a lot of funny business, the facts say that he's filing a counterclaim. So you have to make sense of that and find a discussion there. And there's where we can't let our emotions get the best of us and just feeling for Tuan and not talking about what Leo might be able to sue for. All right, so what we're going to use is our folder system, right, to help us, right? So if you're going through an essay like this, right, and, Ramona, for example, you were saying that you talked about breach of contract for a little bit. Sometimes we kind of land somewhere because we're not exactly sure where we want to go. And in Legally Fit, this is where we use our folder system to kind of like walk ourselves into the issues to discuss if we don't know what's going on. So we're in the world of property. So let me go ahead and share our folder system document. All right, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and navigate this one at a time. This is our first level. Everything we're going to learn in property are in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. Max, out of these 6 sections, what sections or sections appear to be triggered in this fact pattern?
Yeah, landlord and tenant seems to be triggered pretty clearly. Otherwise, when you say other sections, I'm trying to think of if there's any other issues, but I just talked about landlord tenant issues, and remedies is another issue as well, because they're, yeah, what claims can you assert?
And yeah, there's seemingly all these numbers, right?
Yeah,
Asking,
yeah, yeah, of course.
right? Exactly. Good. And by the way, we'll come back to that. But just my quick question to you, right? Remember, the rule of thumb is that whenever you have a remedies question, you have to figure out how much of the underlying law am I going to discuss, right? And is that going to make up 10% of my overall essay, 90%, right? Or something in between. So here, what would you say is the distribution of points, right? Between the underlying, law issue and then the remedies discussion. What would you say is the distribution there, Max? What's your guess in this fact pattern?
Yeah, without looking at the essay again, like in front of me, I think like in my mind when I was doing this question, I think it was like probably 80-20, and I probably wrote like 90-10, like I was just like jumping on the property issues, but
Yeah.
we're in that ballpark.
Good. I agree with you. I think it's around 80-20, about 90-10, right? Because it's really rich in, right, a lot of facts and issues around the problem and not so much the numbers, right? And we don't have necessarily all the details, and the math seems like it would be relatively simple. There's not a bunch of incidental and consequential damages and things to make it crazy. But I think 80-20 is a fair assessment. So yeah, landlord tenant. That's pretty much all we have here. So what you do then is you go into the second level, right? So then we see landlord tenant here, section D. These are all the sections of landlord tenant. So you would, in theory, write this out or think about this, and then you would be thinking, all right, from my second level of landlord tenant here, what's worth a discussion? So out of these 6 sections, Max, what would you say is then triggered here?
Yeah, prioritizing landlord duties. Clearly we have a tenant who's asserting claim or claims against the landlord. So he has some things that he has to do and execute. And then clearly we're always gonna like kind of like almost like a standing conversation. We're gonna talk about what types of leaseholds we have.
Yep.
Just to kind of like, set the stage. We're gonna also want to talk about tenant duties when it comes to the counterclaims that Leo is gonna assert against Tuan. Um, Otherwise, now that I'm looking at the list, there may be a discussion of the doctrine of waste in regards to the 25%, but that just seems like a little extra like creative if you
Yeah.
have the time. Otherwise, I'd focus on those top 3 bullet points within this level.
Awesome job so far. Yeah, I don't think doctrine of waste is going to be worth the discussion here, right? You're looking for a tenant to commit waste, not a landlord. And so the
Right.
landlord here is the one that's like taking up that space. So that wouldn't be an issue of waste here. So yeah, I think those first 3 really solid. Good job. All right. And so then again, you can go further in your folder system and now really look at, as we see here, the discussions of or the things to talk about within those sections. So for type of leaseholds here, we know we have a tenancy for years. All right, that's what I'm going to talk about. For tenant duties, there's nothing about repairs here, but we do have the failure to pay rent. So I'm going to bring up that rule. Under landlord duties, there is a failure to deliver possession. There is no implied warranty of habitability here. I want to have a quick discussion on this and square away some of the misunderstanding here, but there is no implied warranty of habitability. You have then the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment that is going to be triggered. And then I don't think retaliatory eviction or tort liabilities is going to be triggered here at all. Assignment and sublease, again, we didn't trigger that one. There is no assignment and sublease here. Doctrine of waste fixtures, nothing. So there we go. So we have now some doctrines to kind of pull from. And so from there, what we can start to do is make an outline, right? So you'd be using that and we want to make an outline. Before we go further in making that outline, let's talk about that implied warranty of habitability. And Ramona, I heard you mention that one. So give me some insight and tell me why you thought implied warranty of habitability was triggered here.
Well, now I'm remembering, this is all coming back to me right now. I just got off of work, so
Mhm.
this is all coming back to me. Now I'm remembering, I think I like briefly mentioned it at the end, and I just mentioned that it doesn't apply in the situation. This wasn't a residential lease, so I think I like just said something brief about it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to do a quick little raise and dismiss, little flex points of our understanding of the law. And this is a commercial lease. Also, there's nothing to say that, yeah, there's like the implied warranty of habitability is all about the place being habitable. And one, this place is not being used for habitation or living purposes. And on top of that, 25% of the space being unused used is not going to lend it to being uninhabitable. So there's no violation, even if you were to apply it. So you could just do a quick raise and dismiss. Maybe you get some brownie points there. So awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead and share screen now on essentially my issue spotting checklist that I did. And then we can talk about this and make sense of it. All right, so of course, we always want to take the organization provided for us. And so we saw them separate that out into Tuan versus Leo, Tuan versus Annika, and Leo versus Tuan. First one, Tuan versus Leo, right? Hopefully we can see this is where a lot of our points are going to be. Okay, most of points, this is where a lot of the issues lie with not having the property on time and the 25% being used. All those facts are going to go here. You can start this off with types of leaseholds, right? This is a tenancy for years. This is going to be a quick discussion, right? This is a maybe discussion. And if you are going to do it, it's just, again, getting those quick points, letting you know that, hey, this is a term for years. The set end date, the start date was January 1st. We don't know what year it is. We can just assume it was the current year. So in this case, 2023. So it would end in 3033. Boom, you can lay that out. All right, but the reason why we know this is not an in-depth conversation of tenancy for years, there's no issue around when it's coming towards the end of that, how it's going to be terminated or, anything like that. So that's why we know we can just kind of put this out, get the points, move on. Next, landlord-tenant suits. This is also a very just quick discussion, if at all. Definitely not necessary, but that whenever a landlord or tenant is going into a lawsuit, there must be privity in order to bring that lawsuit. And here, there is no privity of estate because Tuan never moved in, but there was privity of contract for the basis of this lawsuit because they did sign a contract for this lease. So slam dunk, easy peasy. There was no assignment and sublease that starts to affect privity. So here is just a slam dunk. Yes, there is privity. Again, definitely don't think this was necessary. These are sometimes the types of little add-ons that you can do to really kind of bump up that grade possibly. All right, now definitely going to get into this prioritized issue right here, which is landlord duties. And so you see here, you should have talked about the duty to deliver possession and also the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment. All right. And then you have your damages discussion. And I just put a quick note that ultimately the damages are for $500, paying $500 more for 120 months by having to do the deal with Bruno. All right. So let's get into this a little bit deeper and level this out to make sure we're getting it. What does Tuan ultimately want here? You always want to ask yourself, what do the parties want? So what does Tuan want here?
Money. Yeah,
right?
He probably just wants money.
In this case, he wants damages, for this. And then ultimately, he also wants to have some excuses for not paying rent as well. So we're kind of also going to be building that case simultaneously, right? And so we can see the first issue that he can maybe use to get a remedy is that the lease was not ready for him to start off on January 1st. So I'm going to take us now to the legally fit blueprint so we can start to go through some of this analysis to get a feel for how this will play out. All right, so this is our blueprint. This is the landlord tenant section. Let me go down to landlord duties. Here we go, deliver possession. Now, there's not much to analyze here, but I think this was a good, section to lay out and get the points. There wasn't a ton of issues here, so you really wanted to be thorough. So when it comes to the duty to deliver possession, we do have a bit of a jurisdictional difference in the two different rules that are out there, right? You have this English rule, this old school rule that said all the landlord had to do was deliver legal possession. So as in this situation, you see it, all Leo had to do was just, sign the contract, deliver legal possession. And if somebody was on the property, it was the tenant's obligation to essentially, get rid of that tenant somehow, right? However, modernly, most jurisdictions require the landlord to deliver actual possession, meaning the tenant must have the ability to immediately enter the property at the start of the lease. All right. So that is what you're going to want to lay out, right? Depending on which rule the jurisdiction takes here will affect the outcome. Now, what does that tenant remedy tell us there, Ramona, for the duty to deliver possession?
The tenant's remedy? Sorry.
The tenant's remedies.
It says the landlord's breach of his duty allows the tenant to suspend their duty of rent. So
Okay, so it's important to understand that and see that, because ultimately, even if you prove a failure to deliver the duty, it's not going to necessarily amount to damages here. But again, this can start to build the case for why they didn't pay rent. I think it's worth going, a couple steps further in this analysis, right, to get all the points here regarding this issue, though, on their duty to suspend rent. When you are talking about suing Leo for failure to do this, I think it's important to lay out that Leo double booked them for the month of January, but seemingly it was Annika's individual personal decision to just stay on the property for that additional 4 months. So I think it's worth laying out. We don't know exactly how the court will handle this unique scenario, but lay that out, okay? And just draw attention to that fact. So there you go. Failure to deliver possession, talk about legal possession versus actual possession, lay out everything, get the points, okay? Then going back to our outline, after that, we went into, and it says here, and I think you could put that Annika was a holdover tenant. After her lease was over and she stayed for an additional 4 months, she would be a holdover tenant. Whether it was wrongful or not, we don't know, because we don't know if Leo was still accepting those checks, but you could just, again, get some points by showing how to label her. Then we have the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment. So then now we're going to move on to the second issue, right? The second issue is that, okay, once this was all over with, right, you had the issue that 25% of the property was being occupied by the landlord, and the tenant did not like this and now doesn't want to stay there anymore and use the property and doesn't want to pay rent. Okay, so going back to our blueprint, let's switch over. All right, so we have three different ways that the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment can be breached: actual eviction, partial eviction, and constructive eviction. So looking at partial eviction, right, it says that this occurs when the landlord, a paramount title holder or a holdover tenant, wrongfully excludes a tenant from a portion of the premises. All right, and here, the tenant remedies are: if the landlord partially evicts the tenant does not have to pay the entire rent, even though they still possess a portion of the property. There's no obligation for the tenant to move out. So this is if the landlord, if the landlord partially evicts, they don't do that. If a third party partially evicts the tenant is still obligated to pay a reasonable value. So here, you could argue that the remedy is, in fact, that this is a partial eviction. And therefore, since it was the landlord doing it, this is going to justify the tenant being able to move out. You could try to go down constructive eviction as well. Max, is this a traditional constructive eviction scenario?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think of what the traditional constructive eviction scenario is again. Can you remind me? It's been a
Yeah. So it's typically the scenarios that kind of like overlap with the implied warranty of habitability. It's going to be like, oh, the toilet wasn't working and I let you know and you didn't come fix it.
right,
And now I
right.
get to evict myself and move out, right? And things like that. So the whole idea of a constructive eviction is that you are evicting yourself,
Hmm.
uh, so that way you can move on. So the idea here is though is that constructive eviction is not technically needed if you can show that the landlord partially evicted you
Hmm.
by excluding you from a portion of the premise. So yeah, whether occupying 25% of the space is going to amount to excluding you from it, right? You can kind of like get into the weeds
Yeah.
there just a little bit, but I think again it's worth a discussion. And so you can go through constructive eviction and it's, again, unique application. But I think, again, considering, how much there is to talk on this essay, it's worth doing constructive eviction as well. And just going through the fact pattern here, landlord failed to fulfill an obligation of providing the entire premise property. This is a substantial interference because they contracted for the entire warehouse. They gave notice, right? You would kind of go through the rest of those elements and talk about it. If successful, constructive eviction is met and the tenant may terminate the lease and sue for damages. Yeah, Ramona, question?
Just really quick. I get what I did wrong now that I'm looking at all of these bullet points. I see definitely where I missed in some of my analysis, but I think I focused a lot on the fact that Juan never moved into the warehouse. He just went to go see the warehouse. And I think that's why I thought constructive eviction wouldn't apply, because I thought it was more, you're already in the space and then something happens type of situation. Maybe I'm just misreading it too now that I'm reading it quickly.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately that could be the issue with the discussion of constructive eviction, right? Because he went to go see it and then just simply said he refused to take possession. And part of constructive eviction is that you gave the landlord notice of the issue and a reasonable amount of time to repair the issue. And so in this case, right, that likely will be a reason why constructive eviction is not as strong of an argument. So I think that's a very good observation and that falls into your analysis. But the good thing is that that's not needed for partial eviction, which again, I think is going to be ultimately the strongest argument. And as we're looking at it, there could even be an argument for actual eviction as well, right? An actual eviction occurs when the landlord, a paramount title holder, or a holdover tenant wrongfully excludes a tenant from the entire premises. So we can bring this up with regards to that 4-month period, right, where Annika was not allowing Tuan to take the property. You can argue that at that point, that was an actual eviction. So I think you're leaning into all three of these as a discussion here. Let me go back into my outline and put, yeah, why not just go ahead and discuss actual eviction as well? I think you're just going to discuss all three of those. So there's an actual eviction by Annika, a partial eviction by Leo, with 25% being occupied, and then a constructive eviction as well by Leo for the same reason. Okay. Now passing over the property. Good. All right, let's go back to our outline. Then you have your damages discussion, and this is where you kind of are bringing in a little bit of contracts, I think, Ramona, but nothing into any crazy detail, and really just for the remedies portion of this. And I'm just talking a little bit about expectation damages and from a big picture. I'm not going to go on and I don't think get into like full formula mode. This would be a game time decision for me based off of how much time I had, but at the very least, I'm just like articulating that Tuan expected to have a 10-year lease for a warehouse for $1,000 a month. It looks as though, right, based on the analysis, that Leo breached this lease agreement, and if so, Tuan would be entitled to damages. And the facts tell you that Tuan was able to find an identical or very close to an almost identical warehouse for $1,500 a month. So that gives you a sense of now what the damages will be that $500 extra that he had to pay is more than what he expected. And so the base of your damages here is going to be just that, the $500 more that he has to pay for that 120 months. That's the heart of your damages here for Tuan. Now, getting to this Tuan versus Annika, this is actually pretty easy, but this one stumped me for a second. I don't know if anybody else was like stumped for a second and taken back on like, what is Tuan going to sue Annika for? So I want to tell you guys, like, it just knocked me off for a second. But again, you have to like go into some area of confidence that like, all right, this has to be something. Let me make sense of it. So the first thing I did was write this note down. This is like literally like, you know, stream of consciousness that you guys are seeing in my work product here. I was like, Annika is a trespasser, not a landlord of any sort, right? So it didn't say anything that like, you know, she took over the unit and she was a landlord of any sort. So we're now immediately out of landlord tenant because Annika is not a landlord. And so all of a sudden it was like, all right, well, it doesn't seem like property anymore. Seems like the best bet is tort damages. And at that point, it looks like it's a trespass to land situation. Max, I see you shaking your head, man. Is this where you think we might have went south?
I mean, like, I don't think this is like the biggest part of the essay, right? Like there's a couple of issues, like if you're going to bring up eviction, bring up all three, right? And I was kind of like so streamlined and focused on like the issues that I thought were like most relevant, but obviously like you have to just like flex all your knowledge, right? On this one, I should have immediately thought of torts, because I said there's no privity of contract. They've never contracted with each other. So what claims can you make against her? And that should have immediately put a light bulb in my head. If you can't sue through contracts, sue for torts, but you know, it's all good in retrospect.
In the heat of the moment, yeah.
Yeah,
and,
of course,
and,
of course.
And this is why, guys, we always talk about that, like, why are the parties upset and what do they want, right? And so ultimately, if you simplify the situation, what you have here is Tuan, who is legally entitled to possess this property, and you have Annika, who is at this point, especially after that 1 month overlap, at this point, you're a stranger who's on my property and you need to get off, right? And when you have a stranger on your property, what area of law is that? Towards, yep, trespass to land. And then you can talk about the remedy, since this seems to be a remedy crossover. You can talk about the remedy of injunction, because that's what you'll use to remove them from the property. You don't really necessarily want damages from Annika. You really want the injunction remedy, but you might even be able to talk about damages, and it could be, you know, the rent for those months as an additional discussion as well. Yeah, Stephanie?
For this area, I was also taken back because I couldn't figure out what it was. And in that moment, I thought holdover tenant. And right now I was like, what the heck is even a holdover tenant? I don't remember. So I went back and looked, and I realized now I understand what my mind was at the time. I felt like, well, Anika has the property and she's paying rent, and Leo, the landlord, keeps accepting the checks.
But that's an assumption, right? Because we don't actually see that in there,
Right.
right? So, yeah, if we go, let me go to the essay for us.
So for the first month in January, it was fine because she had a validly executed lease.
So it looks like, yeah, she was still under her lease for that first month. And then it said, all it says is that when Tuan returned to the warehouse, Annika told Tuan that she was not leaving until May 31st. So we don't know if she was paying rent anymore at that point, but we know she doesn't have a valid lease anymore. And the facts don't tell us that she continued to pay and he continued to accept. So yeah, it's like, without having more information, we're just kind of assuming at this point that she's just trespassing.
Okay, I see.
And also, Stephanie, the reason why holdover tenant, I don't think is going to be the big focus here, is that holdover tenant is an issue between the landlord and the tenant, right?
Not Tuan.
Exactly. They don't have a landlord-tenant relationship amongst each other. So even though he might not be successful, that is still going to be his best bet. But him and her, as Max said, they don't have a contract together. So labeling her as a holdover tenant is of no avail because they never had an agreement.
Yeah, and that's what caught me off guard, because I was like, his problem is with the landlord, not with her. But I needed to write something down, so I guess that's why.
Yeah, and that's again, yeah, this one definitely was going to stump a lot of people. You don't often see a torts property crossover. And again, this is a good lesson and a reminder for all of us that on the bar exam, they like to throw those curveballs. And hopefully we're seeing in this, going through this live together, what you have to do is just like stop for a second and really just kind of sit with it and just like, all right, like, and simplify the facts and what's going on. And it's not always going to be 100%, like, even myself, sometimes, in the heat of the moment, I might not catch exactly what it was, but the objective is to kind of like take that process of like one foot in front of the other. Here, I was able to get this relatively quickly, but I will tell you, Stephanie, I'm not going to lie. I was not like, it tests at your confidence level. I'm like looking at question 2 and I'm like, Twan versus Annika, like what? Like, why would they be suing them? And I'm like, all right. And then I'm just immediately going into process of elimination. I'm like, well, it can't be this, it can't be that. Like, oh, I guess trespass the land, like get off my property, So like, that's what you have to enter into. And then that whenever you enter into that space, you don't spend too much time there. So hopefully nobody, like, if you didn't know what it was, go into too much detail, because you want to like lean into the sections that you do know. So definitely a learning lesson with that one. But yeah, we'll see when the grades are released and the sample answers are released, excuse me, what ultimately the selected answers have. But I feel pretty strongly that this is ultimately what it is. All right, and then you have Leo versus Twan. You kind of wrap up the essay from there. You have the tenant duty to pay rent. Twan's counter is going to be that L breached their duties, and so therefore I do not have to pay rent. So a lot of this is going to be like, refer back to prompt 1, in that discussion. And so you'll kind of bring up, even though there's a duty to pay rent, that duty to pay rent can be terminated and excused for the landlord's breach of duties. Then you would go into your damages discussion. In the event that Leo would be successful, it's worth talking about what his damages would be. He expected $1,000 a month for 120 months. The facts then gave you facts that he mitigated his damages by finding another tenant, Juanita, for $500 a month. So again, ultimately what he's out of pocket for is $500 a month, and that's what he would get if he was successful. But I think the chances are probably low there. Okay, so really good, nice, quick little blitz of a discussion of that property 2 essay. Any questions on this essay before we wrap up? So Max, I know we started off and you were telling me what your score was for this one. Stephanie, I know you're with me now, so I want to hear from you as well. But Max, after seeing that, what will we identify then now as the root cause of why we got a 55 on that essay?
Yeah, there was a couple things I think, like when I look over it, like I had most of the issues, especially for the first call, the question correct. So I'm pretty sure that's where I got a bulk of my points. I think under the exam pressure, I was so like, I just didn't like, and I don't like the word vomit, but like I needed to kind of word vomit a few more doctrine or a few more rules that might have help the reader at least like know like, okay, this guy knows at least what he's talking about. Like maybe his analysis is weaker. The analysis I think is pretty on point. I think the trend was like, I just didn't do enough counter arguments. And that's for most of my essays. I think like not even like being emotional. I was just like, oh, like I just gotta like jam and like get through this, you know what I mean? And I kind of could have slowed down, but I want to be mad at the 55, but I think it's pretty accurate as to my work product.
Got it. Okay. And good. It's all about identifying the issues. And
Yeah.
you're seeing that, I missed a few issues. And on top of that, I need to be more thorough in my analysis and really tease out things. So, good stuff. That's what we're here for at this point, is to figure out how we can get better. So moving on to you, Stephanie. So Stephanie, what did you get for this property essay?
60.
60. Okay. And then what are you identifying as, where you could improve after going through this issue checklist that we just made together?
I think I tend to combine and make chunkier paragraphs instead of teasing it out. Because I did one big paragraph for implied covenant of quiet enjoyment, but in my analysis, as you were talking right now, I was reading my analysis and I see a combination of actual partial eviction all in there. So I think making it easier for the reader to just spread it out and possibly get more points. I don't know, but I see most of what we were talking about in my essay. So
That's good. I mean, and that's indicative of a 60, right? Where it's like, okay, it's in there, but yeah, like teasing it out, you know, and just that, yeah, 100%. I would do a separate discussion for each one because actually eviction was focused on Annika, right? And Annika not giving the property up for those months. Partial eviction is based on the 25% of that property being used. The constructive eviction is on that too, but it has its own set of elements that you have to run through. So in order to get those
missed that
points,
part.
got it. Yeah. So in order to get all those points for the rules, the analysis, right, is just teasing that out. And that's what they're looking for. And then we just remember that people are grading these things really fast. And so my rule of thumb is that I never want a paragraph more than 5 sentences. If it needs its own heading and its own other section, right? And yeah, we know that these graders are grading these things in like 2 minutes. So when you have all that, Stephanie, in one big fat paragraph, it just makes it harder for them to see all the points. So yeah, so we got one more of these, all right, that we're going to do tomorrow. From the people that have come today and participated, any vote that you want to put in the chat for which essay we do for tomorrow. Got a little vote for con law in there.
Which was the first essay?
Let's see.
I think that one was the Civ Pro one.
Yeah, it was.
Yep. First essay is Civ. Okay. All right. So it looks like we got the 2 options, con law, Civ Pro. Yeah, we got 50-50 there. So we'll get a few more feedback and we'll do one of those tomorrow. So I'm going to run for now, but I'm going to stick around longer tomorrow.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, to answer any other questions, additional things. If anybody's interested in signing up for Legally Fit, right, you can come tomorrow. We're going to have more information again on our program for the upcoming July exam. I'm going to go through more detail, but for now, use the rest of tonight to compare and contrast. We just did a nice little review together. Try to do a little bit of that time of identifying from your work product, why did I miss some of the points, and start that process of identifying your strengths and weaknesses so you can make that customized attack plan that we talked about yesterday. So we'll be back on here tomorrow at 7 p.m. for either Con Law or Civ Pro. You guys have a great rest of your night, and I'll see you then. All right, guys.